Good morning, Al. Good to see you, brother. How are you?
I'm good, Stace. How are you, my friend?
Really great. We're excited to have another recording of fourth level conversations and hope that people watching or perhaps spending a little time in our conversation today will get some value out of it. But I know we were talking this morning about what a season we're in this election cycle. And here we are just 5 days away or 6 days away from the election at this point. And I don't know about you, but I'm definitely ready for the ads to stop, the nonstop text that I've not asked for to
Right,
stop,
right.
and all of those, and that in itself spurs some feelings and thoughts and emotions. And so, as we're considering today, started thinking about how do we talk about one of the non-discussables among friends and families, which is politics or faith and religion, and sometimes money, all those things. But politics being one that seems to be quite divisive if there aren't shared opinions. And so we were talking, brother, that could it be possible that people with divergent opinions could actually talk about this issue and the candidates that are we're considering for the leadership of the policies and decisions that we think are important for the country and our families and our society without feeling attacked, without feeling the need to attack, and perhaps finding some common ground. So I'm going to
Hmm.
let you ramble on this subject for a little bit, and then I'll share thoughts as we go along.
Well, let me ask you to set this up by describing in sort of brief order how you see the current climate of divisiveness in America, Stace.
Yeah. I was thinking about this morning and thinking this must be this election in particular at the presidential level must be the most divisive election we've ever had. And then I was thinking about, I bet you if you go back some generations, people were probably saying the same thing during those elections. Maybe the vitriol language is worse. Maybe there's some more focus on personalities and behaviors than there are actual policies and
Right.
execution of those policies. But it does feel to me, Al, that this is one of the most. To me, it would be astonishing to me that there really are undecided voters today because these two candidates are so polarizingly opposite of one another that it would be hard to say, well, I could go either way. And maybe there are. I don't know. But it feels to me like what's happening is that because of the use of technology and social media and AI and the billions of dollars now being spent on television ads and the like, it's hard to escape the ugliness of it, in my opinion. It's pure. It comes across as pure hatred. I don't know if it actually is that or it's more acting and it's posing and it's all those things that the candidate might not really believe about the other person, but somebody told them that you'll get voters if you say these things. And I've always felt like it's kind of sad when we don't really dig into what will this person actually stand for in that office and do for the nation and the world, because let's face it, the decisions made by our president impacts the world. So instead we decide whether we like someone or not. And I was talking to a friend recently about this, and I thought the person that this person wanted to disqualify was based on personality, characters, and maybe moral failures and so forth. And I really challenged this person to think, well, can we say that about both candidates? Couldn't we say that about ourselves in some respects? And so, if we're basing these important decisions on how we think of that person's personality or maybe the publicly shown failures they've had, nobody would qualify. And so, how do we, as Americans that care about this nation, have a conversation about what direction the country should go in and who would be the best candidate to do that? And I don't think I have all the answers out, other than I know I want my opinions to be respected. And therefore, I can only have that if I respect the opinions of others, even if I wouldn't agree with their opinions. And it doesn't make them bad and it doesn't make them wrong necessarily.
Mm.
So I think it's very divisive because of all the technology and access to media. Certainly, it appears biased media, perhaps on both sides at some level. And so the messaging that we're getting, I think, makes us all feel like I don't know if I can trust my neighbor anymore because they think I'm, something that I'm probably not. And they're not going to be something I probably think they are. How do we deal with that?
That may be the most brilliant and objective analysis of this election I've heard. I think it's wonderfully put. And we're here to have level 4 conversations. And for people that aren't used to, they've never run across you or I, they don't know what the hell we're talking about. I think there may be no more appropriate topic for us to really consider through the contrast of level 3 and level 4 than when it comes to this election. You just so beautifully articulated as far as where it seems like it stands. So how do you, in sort of a summary sense, how do you see the summary of the contrast between level 3 and level 4 in looking at this situation we find ourselves in?
Yeah. So whenever you ask questions like that, Al, I always come back to how do I think on those two different levels? And for me, I know that when I start feeling like I'm getting bubbled up over a controversial issue like this, I know I'm in level 3. So level
Right.
3 is my ego's been offended, my intelligence is being challenged, my morals perhaps are even being questioned. And so I'm going to fight. And my
Right.
response comes out as a result of that. And so
Right.
my job now, as a level 3 thinker, is to prove the other person wrong. And in some cases, maybe go further and actually attack them because they attacked me. And I'm not talking about physically. I'm just talking about intellectually and verbally and those things. Level 4 says, how interesting that the person I'm talking to has that opinion. I wonder why they have that opinion. I wonder what they're basing it on. I wonder what past experiences in their life have caused them to have these intellectual and emotional beliefs about politics or a politician. And maybe I can learn something that will help me evaluate whether I think my beliefs and convictions are the best that I could have for myself and therefore for my community and the bigger part of the world.
Beautiful.
Because it's a maturity issue, right? This difference between level 3 ego driven and this level 4 soul identity, and this idea that we're here for a reason, we're all in it together. So if half the country votes differently than I did, it doesn't mean that I'm not a part of them anymore. And level 4 would understand that those are my brothers, my sisters, my fellow humans, and we are on this earth at this time together. Could have been any other time. And therefore, I can't disenfranchise people who have a different opinion of me. It doesn't make them less valuable in this world, doesn't make them more valuable than me. It makes them human. And so am I. So you'll do a better job of
No, I think
describing.
that's great. Well, as I was approaching this conversation this morning, I was considering the idea that the last great freedom is to discuss the undiscussables. And this is a topic that has become largely undiscussable because it so quickly provokes polemic, emotional, vitriolic reaction in people. So as I'm showering this morning, I'm thinking about this fact we're going to have this conversation. I was contrasting level 3 and 4, and I found myself coming back to the three truths of the holy man as a filter through which to kind of look at this. And I thought, well, first let me set up how I see the situation and then how the three truths apply, at least when I look at it. I think everybody wants the same thing. They want to have a positive future that they feel is equitable and fair for everyone. They want to decrease suffering in the world. They want to have a peaceful world. They don't want World War III, and they don't want that. And they want to have society advance in the direction of less conflict, less suffering. I think we share that, left and right. I think where we differ is in how to get there. And I think the focus in level 3 and 4 tends to be, as you beautifully articulated, our ego self has this dynamic, at least in my opinion, that the ego's number one criteria and priority is survival, and survival of it, because it identifies as me. I mean, I identify as my ego. My ego identifies as me. So the ego is looking for threats to its existence, and one symptom of that threat would be being wrong, would being on the right track. So we tend to really gravitate as egos to being right, and we set up this idea that there is an absolute right and wrong about everything in life, when in fact that is only true from different levels of perspective. It's really a more of a relative thing. We're dealing in the realm of black and white, when in fact this election and the candidates and the issues are largely gray. I've thought about what is it that differentiates liberals from conservatives. I don't use the term progressives because I think that's part of the language compromise that somehow is different. But I think what's the difference between liberals and conservatives? And I think we can largely say represent the two political parties. Um, I think when you look at issues, let's say abortion. Boy, you hate to even say the word because you know what I mean. Everybody gets tense and they're ready to go to war if you don't say what I want to say. But if we look at abortion objectively, it's really the same issue, and two different aspects are being emphasized. For women, they see abortion as a woman's right to choose, that I want to have control over my own body. I don't want to have the government or man or anyone else telling me what I can and can't do with this body. And that's a totally understandable perspective. You and I would want that as men. So I get why, when that's the side of the abortion issue women look at, they're outraged that anyone would feel any differently. That's the liberal focus, I think, that tends to go along with the idea of women have been repressed for too long and men have control them in society, da da da. Now, where it gets extended is when they want it to be a universal national right as opposed to a states' rights issue. And they want it to be unconditional. It can happen up to 9 months and the baby's born, because they feel that intense and singular in terms of the woman's right to choose. If you look at the conservative issue, they look at it as a higher priority, which is life itself. They see it as murder. They see that you're murdering a baby, and that supersedes a woman's right to choose or a man's right to choose or whatever. So you have the same issue with two different aspects, each being emphasized, and that's why there's this breakdown of dialogue. What would a more holistic, perhaps level 4 view be on it, at least in my opinion? Both are true. So, what would be the compromise middle ground that we could get to that would allow a more measured and fair approach to the issue? For me, it's that I look at my own values and say, well, which do I think has a more valid priority in the discussion, a baby's life or a woman's right to choose? And I will tend to default on the side of a baby's life, and probably because I'm not a woman. And yet I want to be sensitive to the fact that half the country are women, and they do have this concern, and it's a legitimate concern. So my tendency would be to say, well, I think then the best compromise, and we're not talking compromise these days, but I think we need to be, the best compromise would be make it into a states' right issue, or even a community to community issue, not federal, where if you happen to live in a place where your neighbors agree with you that we're going to emphasize a woman's right to choose, you should have the right to do that and have it be legal. And whereas if you live in a community where the focus is on the baby's life as a higher priority, then you should be able to have that be what's legal. And therefore, I think that in a way this becomes a federalist issue of what states should be choosing for recognizing more localized community paradigms that work for the people living in that community without making it a national thing. And then we get into, well, should taxpayers pay for it? Perhaps on the state level, if it's a states' right issue. I don't have the answer, but that's an example of, I think, one among a bunch of issues where we're focusing in too polemic of a manner on only one side of the issue being righteous and the other being evil. And then what that does, to your point, is it creates emotional sanctimony in the ego to want to go to war over it, because the ego wants to not only survive, but feel righteous and superior and correct. And so the way it does that is it tends to seize limited information and then make that the only truth and then get emotionally aggressive about it, which is what creates the breakdown. And well, I'll pause with that before I say anything else. What's your response to all that?
Well, I think that issue is a great example of the divisiveness that gets created at the national level because both sides are coming at that from a perspective of I'm right and the other side is not.
Right.
And therefore, the power of influence over those issues is large because of the technology and money that is available to use that technology.
Right.
So when we come back to how do we as people deal with that issue, and so as a human being, and if I were talking to someone about that issue and they see it differently than I do, I think my hope is that we can have healthy dialogue that perhaps even apart from one another, it enlightens us a bit more about
Beautiful.
the issue.
Yeah.
That maybe it helps us learn how to communicate with others on issues that are divisive just by nature. You described that very well, and I've come to learn that what I believe is right is no less strong than what somebody on the other side believes is right for them. And therefore, how do I interact with them on an issue like this? Because the problem is that these issues have to be dealt with
Mm-hmm.
because we have diversity in this country, and so the only way to make sure that I don't offend the other person with my thoughts on it is to not talk about it. And that's why you and I decided to bring this up today, because that's the general response on politics and faith and religion and other things is let's just don't talk about it. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think we move the world forward if we don't. And actually, I think our human nature is when we don't talk about it is to dig deeper in our belief that we're completely right and the other person or side is completely wrong. And so then the roots of that division get dug deeper and deeper and deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, we know the other person or side thinks that way, and we could be on a completely different subject, and we automatically believe they're wrong because we
Right.
don't talk about it.
Right.
And so I hope that what we're kind of trying to communicate is don't be afraid to have conversations like this, but do it from a perspective of level 4 to deepen your understanding of life in this world and the people that you have in your life without necessarily judging them. It doesn't mean you have to compromise your personal beliefs and values, but
Right.
maybe we could just stop judging someone else's who's actually doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
They're convicted by their beliefs and their values.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that from the beginning of time of humanity that this would be quite a boring world if we all thought just alike, wouldn't it, Al?
Yes.
Think how
Yes.
boring this world would be.
Well, and I think from level 4, from a personal value standpoint, when I'm in that space, the way I look at this is it's really none of my business what other people think. I'm responsible for what I think and how I act. And I'm going to approach this without extending the fact that others need to validate me by agreeing with me. A. B. I'm going to get more information.
Yeah.
This polemic of developing a singular focus on an issue. Uh, Donald Trump's the devil. He wants to be Hitler. Kamala Harris is a charlatan and a puppet for the powers that be. Whatever. I think even the whole issue of the election itself speaks to still another area, which is the view of government. I
Mhm.
think on the left, there tends to be a belief that government is a force for good. They tend to, I think, look at government as sort of an entity unto itself that's here to protect the weak and rebalance inequities in society and all those things. And it can be all those things, and at times it is all those things. And so there tends to be an innate trust of government and its whole premise of existence from the left. I think from the right, there's a distrust of government. I remember going back to the Reagan years when he said, people think government is the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. I think that captures well the conservative mindset that's leery of government. Why? Because they see it as not just an institution that's intrinsically benevolent, but as individuals with their own motives for power and profit within it that are going to be operating for self-interest that may not be in group interest. And so we even have that breakdown of how much we even trust the premise of what we're doing, which is why the founding fathers were so brilliant in the way they set this up with the balance of powers. And so when I'm in my level 4 looking at this, I let go of the idea that I already know and I want to get more information. Second, I want to make the case in my mind for that which I don't believe in. Why do people support abortion? So put myself in that mindset. Why would I be for it? Why would I be for Kamala Harris? Instead of what I normally would say about her in my head, my ego would say about her based on limited information I have. What do they see about her that excites them and that has them feel good about her? Oh, she's a unifier and she's a woman and she's of color and we haven't had that before and that shows that we're getting better and less racist and sexist and blah, blah, blah. I get it. I think it's important to consider the opposition's perspective on things. So what it brings me to, Stace, as a cleansing thing on all this is the three truths of the holy man as a way to remember of how to look at this through my level 4. So walk people through what the three truths of the holy man are, where they came from, and how you see them applying to this issue.
Yeah. Well, I think that, first of all, things are perfect just as they are, right? That things are okay. I'm going to let you expand deeper on that because I know you're more entrenched in that thought process.
I had a holy man 50 years ago share these with me in a private session with him doing some things. And the first one he said is, I want you to remember that doubt is the source of all suffering. And I had this event that happened after that where I wrote a letter that saved a guy's life by putting that quote on the envelope. And I've shared that in previous podcasts. But if I look at just that first truth and say, well, how does that apply to this election? Folks, this isn't going to be the end of the world, regardless of how it turns out.
Right.
And Stacey is right. I can go back to probably the first elections I remember this, well, really Nixon and Kennedy. And now I was little, I was 8 years old when that happened. But Nixon and Kennedy, it was the devil versus the saint, depending which side you were on. Nixon in his 68 and 72 elections. Carter's election, Reagan, to be sure, and every election we've had since then, it's always been the end of the world if my candidate doesn't win. So if we look at that first truth of the holy man, doubt is the source of all suffering. What it implies is that the opposite of doubt is the antidote to suffering, which is faith. So the first thing I'm invited to do with a level 4 perspective on this election is to have faith that whoever wins, and whoever wins Congress, the world will go on. America will go on. And there'll be some good things and some bad things that evolve out of it. And that will even lead us to rebalance if it's too out of line one way or the other. That's the history of this country. So this is all a lot of drama that feels like it's life and death when in fact it's just another stage in a long play that we've all been a part of for a long time, and it's going to be fine over time. There'll be short-term adjustments in our tax levels or our risk of war and all that, but that's just part of life in the world. The second truth is everybody's doing the best they can with what they have to work with all the time. And your job, he told me, is not to judge them or fix them. It's to give them more to work with, and they will take it from there. Well, that allows me an element of compassion for those that are going to vote differently than I'm going to vote. They aren't my enemy. I don't hate them. They aren't wrong, and they aren't evil and stupid because they're voting for the candidate I don't support. They are doing the best they know how to based on the information they are programming themselves with, just like I am based on the information I'm programming myself with. And you can see it because if you live in a family like I do, where we all tend to agree, my wife will come, oh, you got to come over and see this video. Can you believe that? And so we love to reinforce it. But if I remember, everybody's doing the best they can. And those people with the political signs in their yard that are for the opposition candidate, I don't need to respond to my level 3 ego to want to put a black line through their sign or put up "you're an idiot" sign or something, which my ego wants to do, egg their house, do something. Instead, it invites me to realize, well, is that a person that if I didn't know how they were going to vote, I would automatically hate? No. I would look at them with the open architecture as another person doing the best they can. I think that's a healthy way of looking at it. It's just we need to be responsible for what we're deciding and what we're deciding it on to do our best in alignment with our values. And then we need to let God or whatever source you believe in that created all of this do its work and trust that it's going to flow forth fine. And the last one that you referenced is that everything in life in the universe is always and always perfect. It's only the level of perspective from which we view it that creates the experience of suffering. You and I, brother, are probably not going to be on this planet in 50 years. Probably not in 30 years. Maybe not in 10 years. Maybe not next week. We don't have time any longer to operate in the sanctimony of level 3 ego, of thinking that it's our job to fix the wrongs in the world. I think what we can do is take our perspective big enough to say, this too shall pass. It will go the way that it went. All the doom and gloomers from the past that said it's going to be the end of the world if Nixon won or whoever won, the world didn't end. It still kept going. This will keep going. And we need to, I think, expand our perspective to realize all three truths: that everybody's doing their best. I need to have faith, and I need to realize that somehow this is perfect. And the job at this moment is to trust its perfection and then to do the work to get more information until I can expand perspective enough to appreciate its perfection so I can live with a sense of peace, kindness, compassion, and support for other people, even if they vote differently than I do. What are your
I
thoughts?
really hope, and thanks for going in depth there. I kind of blanked on the three truths. The What just occurred to me is I know I've done this in past elections, either election night or the next day. If my candidates didn't win or my issues didn't win, dread, depression, short lived, but still there.
Right.
Maybe if we can remind ourselves of those three truths on Tuesday of next week,
Right.
the day after, we'll be okay. Glad that's done. I don't have to watch all those ads now.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
just get on with living our lives because, as you described, we're all going to go on and be just fine.
Right. I even
So,
understand we're not going to know who won.
probably not.
I've heard projections. We're not going to know who won until we get to January because of all the controversies coming. I only hope and pray and encourage anyone listening to this that at the end of the day, we're all Americans. We're good people. We're trying to do our best. We don't want groups to be repressed or unfairly treated on either side. That includes white Christian males, that includes conservatives. We don't want to have prejudice and punishment for people just because of how they look, what they believe. That's the premise of America. Let's let's vote our conscience without that being sanctimonious as the only way that's legitimate to vote. Let's make it between myself and my creator, however I see that creator, that I'm going to do my best based on what I know and then I'm going to trust the outcome, even if it's different than what I thought it would be. And let me be a force for healing the relationships that are being challenged and broken in this election. And, part of my paranoid mind sees conspiracies of media and universities and the Russians and the Ukrainians and the North Koreans. I see all these things. So what I've really done the last month or two, Stacey, is I've actually stayed away from political news. I don't watch it. I turn it off. I don't watch videos or podcasts about it, because all that does is whatever you believe, it just adds fuel to the fire and has you inflame your hate. I call it the ego licking its eyebrows, because it's almost satanic, I think, in how our ego, there are no barriers when it comes to somebody who's about to destroy America because they're going to elect Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. I owe it to them to kill them, because there's too much of that, and that's being inflamed.
It is.
For purposes of power, persuasion, profit, whatever. So let's play a bigger game, folks. Let's allow other people to do their best with what they know that may be superior to what we know. Let's try to understand the other side without hatred, and let's do our best to operate inside our own values, and then let's trust where it goes without turning this into something more than it needs to be. I'll let you bring us home, brother.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I was thinking about any message I'd personally want to give anybody about voting. And the first would be, do it. There is, I think, a civic responsibility, but do it for yourself. You'll feel good that you voted. And so if there are people that haven't historically done that, there's lots of ways to do it now. Mail in early voting day, but do it. You'll feel great about yourself. And then the second, vote for whoever on every level, president, congressional members, whatever. Just know why you are. Don't necessarily do it just because you have a D or an R in your name or beside your registration and you've always done that. Just know the people, know the policies, know the reasons. And I'm all for you if you vote different than me, but you know why you did it. That's the way it's supposed to work. So we hope that you'll have a good voting season. And
you gave me, excuse me for interrupting, Stace. Before we close, you gave me an idea of one more thing to be said.
Great.
Part of the problem I see, the poison of this election, is too many people, maybe most people, are not voting for someone, they're voting against someone.
Right.
Let's consider that that's a level 3 thing, is I so dread and fear and hate the other person, I'm going to vote for this person. Let me invite you all, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Stacey.
You're great. Go.
But let me invite you all to vote for love. Vote not because you necessarily love the candidate, but for those you love, your children, grandchildren, family, neighbors, friends. Even when you're gone, vote for the person you believe is going to advance America, not perfectly and not always in agreement with every policy you want, but generally you feel is going to be a better solution to advance America for those you love, from your love, not against who you've been programmed to think is the devil. Because that's part of the sickness, I think, right now in this election. I don't know how many people are actually voting for anyone. I think most people are voting against someone, and that's symptomatic of a country that right now has a lot of compromise in its institutional integrity. And I think we need to start to take that back. We need to start making government more trustworthy by having government operate at more level 4. Not just ourselves. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Stacey.
No, that's perfect. On both sides, the rhetoric that you hear from both sides is why you shouldn't vote for the other person.
Right.
And both sides have done it in depth. And I get that they think it works. And probably when you appeal to level 3 egos across the country, it does.
Yeah.
And that's why we have so much of it. I was reminded of the difference between the two debates with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump versus J.D. Vance and Tim Walz.
Yeah.
And I don't know if everybody watched it, but the vice presidential debate is the way America's supposed to work.
Yeah.
It was civil. It was about the issues. It was respectful of one another.
Yeah.
They brought their wives on the stage and had congratulations for the evening. That's the best of America, right?
Beautiful.
Let's
Beautiful.
get to that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, Stacey. What a wonderful topic. And I love your insights. And I hope some folks watch this and it has them go to a larger, expanded perspective on voting from your soul, not your ego, and trusting whatever happens is ultimately going to be for the best anyway.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this today. Thank you
Me
so
too.
much, Stacey.
I hope you all found some value in this. And again, we don't talk too often about controversial subjects. And I don't think we actually talked too controversial about it. We just brought the subject up to how maybe we could approach it better as a nation, as individuals trying to live our best lives.
That's beautiful.
Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And we are so grateful for you watching.
Thank you,
Take care,
folks.
Al. Thanks, bud.